Well, I guess that's it. Now you know me. I'm Trisha. How many of you are surprised to see me standing up here today? Oh, like nobody? Y'all all knew this was going to happen? Okay, thank you. We have one honest. Can we switch this up today? Y'all, I'm not going to play games today. As you heard from him, I do speak for a living, have a lot of fun things that I do. However, this is different. You know, y'all are my people. I usually sit in the back because we roll in about 7 minutes late at the 9 a.m. service. But I'm really excited. When he called me, it's funny, they were praying over this morning, and it felt like, he was like, hey, I would really like you to speak for me. And I thought he was joking. I spoke at the women's ministry, January maybe, and I was like, are you sure? Felt a lot like the disciples when God was like, hey, you're going to go out and do miracles. And I was like, this is what it felt like. But it actually was very appropriate for what the message God had placed on my heart. So I'm going to ask you right now to look to your friend to the right and be like, did you know she was going to be here? Go ahead. Now look to the person to your left and say, I bet this is going to be good. No, like, do it. Don't laugh at me. I'm serious. I want you. This is going to be good. I got jokes, I got fun, but I also got a little bit of Jesus. Pastor John said, y'all, my heart in life, if you dig into who I am and afterwards you Google or Facebook stalk me, you'll learn that I am really passionate about taking the hardest parts of our stories and turning them into the passion that fuels us. These things that I do, I've always loved to talk, so naturally. Babe, they gave me a microphone. My husband is on the front row. Y'all give him a round of applause for listening to me. Only because he begged me not to call him out, and I was like, sweetheart, you're the one that helped me train for this, so you get to be called out. But I'm a firm believer that we all have a gift and that God is using these gifts for a powerful purpose. And so Pastor John has been teaching about words to live by. Last week, if you were here, he talked about how the battle is not yours, it's the Lord's. So I'm here today to talk about what do you do then? God's over here fighting the battle, but then what do you do? So we're going to get started, and as the day goes on, I'll introduce you just a little bit more about myself so you get context so you don't think I'm crazy. I am a little bit crazy, but all you need to know is I brought my big Bible today, and the bigger the Bible, the closer to Jesus, so you're welcome. But if you have your Bible, I want you to turn to 1 Peter 4, verse 10. This is it's my life verse. Pastor John he said, Trisha, the message is words to live by. And the first thing that came to mind was 1 Peter 4:10. This is everything that I stand for. This is to the core of who I am. I tell my husband this all the time. When I volunteer or speak or create, he's like, you doing something else? Yes, because this is what I believe about life. 1 Peter 4:10 says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Each of you has a gift. I work with clients one-on-one. Yes, I do the podcast and all of that, but I work with a lot of women individually who say, I feel like I have this thing, but I don't know how. You all have these gifts that God has given you, but more often than not, what I find 99% of people go, I don't know how to do anything with it. What do I do next? I love to watch people build businesses and grow because so often we do what we're used to, but there's this thing in our heart that we're like, what if I could this? How many of you ever said, I just don't know how? And maybe it's not in relation to, maybe it's not in relation to your business or life. I work with a lot of female entrepreneurs, but also on a personal level. I don't know how to live without them. I don't know how to grow this. I don't know how to make more money. There's so many things that we're faced with every single day that we don't know how to do. So today, we're going to walk through a little bit of that, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about me because I feel like I'm a walking I don't know how, and then I figure it out. I am originally from Augusta, grew up, went to Lakeside High School, so this is new for me. Yes, I'm now from Lincolnton. That's what they told me to say, because I'm an NFLer, but I love it here. But this is not the way I grew up. I did not grow up on a little farm. We have a small farm, small to some, big to others, whatever. We have this farm, and y'all, I grew up with a father who was not present. Drugs and alcohol were his way he spent his time. So I learned how to do a lot of things on my own. Then I married a strapping military man who was like, sure, you can pull a trailer. And I was like, Okay, that sounds good. That sounds amazing. So we began this life with these two boys in this farm, and we have these cows and these chickens and these things that I was like, what am I going to do with those things? I didn't know how. And I know this is trivial and this is simple, but it was something that back whenever my dad wasn't there, I was like, I don't know how to take care of this stuff in my life. I don't know how to do this. But with each and every stage, God showed up. And so my goal for you today is to think about areas in your life where God showed up when you didn't know how to do something. Because he's gonna fight the battle. He's gonna be there for you. We know the promises, but what do you do next? Here's a story. We're gonna do some more Bible stories today. We're gonna go to 1 Samuel. How many of you got your big Bibles? Nobody? Okay, let's look on the screen. I'm gonna read it to you because we're gonna talk about Jonathan and Saul. This is another one of my life moments when I'm like, motivating myself to do something. And we're gonna dig into this today. In 1 Samuel 13, verse 19. So this is a point in time when the Israelites were fighting the Philistines. Y'all know the Goliath Philistine. And so here we are. And this is the context you can find. They're going to war. And in verse 19, it says, no blacksmith could be found in all the land of Israel, because the Philistines have said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. AKA, they got a lot of the raw materials, they got a lot of goods, and the enemy said, oh, they can't form those into something that'll fight us, so we're gonna take away the blacksmith. We're gonna take away the resources of the people who can teach them how to take their raw materials and use them something to fight us with. How many of you have a set of raw materials right now that you're like, I wasn't raised that way? I did not know how to use them. So they're just sitting there and you're waiting on somebody to tell you how to put them into something that God can use. If we skip down to verse 22, it says also, so let me read verse 22 so you get the context. It says, so all the Israelites went to the Philistines to sharpen their plows, mattocks, axes, and sickles. So basically, the Israelites have to go, will you please sharpen this for me? Please, can you do this? They were all in control. The price was 2/3 of a shekel, plows and mattocks 1/3 of a shekel. Basically, it cost them a lot of money so that they wouldn't go do that. So in verse 22, it says, so on the day of battle, not a sword or spear could be found in the hand of any of the troops who were with Saul and Jonathan. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had weapons. Y'all, I heard a sermon a couple years ago that changed my life. It was like, how many of you feel like you're fighting a battle with no weapon? You're like, okay, here I am. Another backstory, my husband who is now home from deployment, he's gonna hate that I talk about him, but we went through roughly 16 deployments together in our 13 years of marriage. And so the biggest question I get asked, how do you do it? It's like coffee and Jesus, I'm not really sure. It's a lot. It was hard. I didn't know how. If you asked me, I was on a podcast recently, they said, how do you do it? I was like, I don't know. It wasn't the same formula every time. And so what I find when I work with entrepreneurs, when I talk to people, when I minister to people, they're like, I just don't know how. My younger brother died from a drug overdose at my dad's house when he was 25 years old in January of 2019. How many of you lost somebody close to you and you thought, I don't know how to move forward now? I know it's getting heavy, it's really hard. This is real, this is hard, because it's not just your gifts. This is everything that you're faced with. This is the real, raw conversation that you need to have with the Lord. This is something that, y'all, here I am standing on stage talking to you, fine people, and my whole life I was told I talk too much. If you're lucky, we'll get out of here in 20 minutes and you can go to lunch early and you can thank me and ask Pastor John to bring me back. But y'all, for real, I was told I talked too much. I didn't know that God was gonna use this later. I had no idea. Today, as you're sitting there, have you thought about something in your life like, man, I'm trying to go here, but I just don't know how. I have all of these goods. I can talk or speak, I can greet, I have the gift of hospitality, I can love, I can do all of these things, but I don't really know how to formulate them into anything that can be used. What do you think the enemy wants? Probably wants to keep you from forming it into a weapon, because the very gifts that you're sitting on are the things that God needs you to do. And I'm not just talking about standing on stage, I'm talking about the greeters at the door, the people who led ministry, the ones who say, you know what, you're done, I'm bringing you casserole because I know you're having a hard week. I talked to some of the women in ministry. She does a quilt ministry. And I had made a reference, not by coincidence, to quilting. And she came up and she was like, that's what I do. And I was like, there's so many things that you can do. I tell my husband, the gifts of leadership, especially the authority that men have to walk in and speak life to the younger generation, it's a gift. But what do you think the enemy wants to do? That's not that big of a deal. You don't really need to use that. It's not that serious. That's what he does. He keeps us in a way of being afraid, because fear, what does fear do? It paralyzes us. We're like, I don't know what to do now, so I'm just gonna stop. And we stand there. And we go through the motions of what we're comfortable with. And over here, we have this powerful gift that God is ready to use. We're gonna move into, I'm gonna read from 1 Samuel 14. I'm gonna give you the context because there's a lot of good amazingness in it. And I hope you fall in love with this passage as much as I did. But I'll read from it. It's not gonna be on the screen. So you just get to listen to me talk. That was funny, you can laugh. Okay. All right, Jonathan's victory of the Philistines. Verse 14, verse 1. That same day, Saul's son Jonathan said to the attendant who carried his weapons, come on, let's cross over to the Philistine garrison on the other side. However, he didn't tell his father. Saul was sitting under the pomegranate tree on the outskirts of Gibeah. The troops with him numbered about 600. So picture this, Jonathan's standing there. They're surrounded by Philistines. His dad's chilling under the tree, and he's like, if we sit here, we're going to die. Like, we got nothing. They had no weapons. What did we say there were? There's about 600 men. And if you study, when I studied this a little bit further, actually, Saul sitting under the pomegranate tree, you can do the research. I'll send you the link to the sermon that I learned this from. But they said the pomegranate tree represented the promise of God. You see, the pomegranate tree was something that God had given them, and the priest would wear some of it on their robe, and it represented the blessing. So Saul was technically sitting under a blessing of God, which is fine. But you can't go with God and stay where you are. If he's calling you to move forward into enemy territory, sitting under the promise is not where you need to be. Sometimes there are times when you have to. When, like a personal testimony, when grief strikes, you don't know where to move or what to do. So you sit in the promise to know that he's never gonna leave you or forsake you. You sit in the moments when you know God is gonna be there. When you receive the cancer diagnosis, that initial onset, there are times when there's no movement necessary because you just need to sit in the peace of God. You need him to wrap you in his arms and carry you. There's a time for that. But there's a time, and you all know that you've probably been faced with a time when it's time to move forward. And it's scary, and it's hard, and it's messy, and you're like, what do I do? And so if I could have a subtitle to the Words to Live By sermon, it would be Not So Fancy Faith. If you dig into what I do, the book that I have coming out later this year, I began sharing my testimony after losing my brother and then my dad and a series of people in my family. I got to a point where I realized people need encouragement. So I began a business of motivation. I don't know how this is working, but God's working it out the way that he's supposed to. But it became something that I knew in my heart needed to be done. I had a lot of skill sets that I could teach you, marketing and sales and all the glory, but that is not what God was calling me to. And so in this messy, babe, has it been messy? Ask him. This messy journey, I just knew the direction that God was calling me, and I didn't know what it looked like. And so Jonathan, you see him here, his dad's sitting, but Jonathan knew he had to go forward with the only resources that he had, his armor bearer. Him and his armor bearer. So if we skip to verse 4, it says, there were sharp columns of rock on both sides of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine garrison. We can get into the names, you don't need to do all that. That's not the important part. Let's picture this. Now, we feel good, we're ready, we're gonna step out into enemy territory, and then we go, and the only way through is 2 sharp rocks in this big pass that you gotta climb through, and it's an obstacle. How many of you have said, I'm gonna do this, I'm making a decision, and we're gonna do the right thing? And then you were faced with these big, sharp obstacles, and you're like, whoa, hold on a minute. Have you ever done that before? Yeah. Thank you for speaking back to me, because it feels weird when you don't. No, we get to a point sometimes where you're like, wait a second. But if you study these sharp columns and it gave him a specific strategic advantage that if they were going to go to battle, it was actually the perfect place that they could potentially achieve the victory. So the sharp rocks that maybe you're like, dang, I don't know if I'd be climbing some jagged edge to get to something that may be a promise. I'm not sure. But here we are. Jonathan said to the attendant, this is verse 6, who carried his weapons, come on, let's cross over to the garrison of these uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will help us. Nothing can keep the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. The Lord will save us, just like Pastor John said. He will fight the battle. He'll fight the battle. Jonathan was like, look, we got this. Like, God's gonna, he can win, so we're gonna go through the rocks. We're gonna do it. All I know is sitting in a place, I can't do this anymore. Have you ever been in a place where you were so uncomfortable that you were like, out there, it's like the lesser of two evils. I can't sit here or we're gonna die, but I gotta go. I don't know what it looks like, but I gotta do it. This is that not so fancy faith. All he had were these raw materials, these lack of resources, his armor bearer buddy that was like, got your back, and we're going through some sharp edges, and you're like, oh, this is not what I thought. I know, without you even acknowledging, that there's times in your life you're like, this is not what I thought it was gonna be. This is not what I pictured. God, you told me this was gonna be good, and here we are. Jonathan, after he says, perhaps the Lord can save us, in verse 7, the armor bearer responded, do what's in your heart, you choose. I'm right here with you, whatever you decide. Do you have friends like that in your life? I'm going to shout out to my friends. I'm just saying, a few of them in the crowd coming here to represent today, just so that I wouldn't freak out on stage. Because people that say, you know what? If you think it's good, I'm going with you. That was their role in the time. It's like, I've got your arm. If you think it's good, I'm going. Guys, the importance of friends. How these deployments that I went through in life, or the chicken class that I went to. Yes, I'm a certified chicken lady. You're welcome. That is the certification requirements to preach for Pastor John when he is away, is to there were times in my life, y'all, where I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Like he left on deployment. I got some animals and I don't know what to do with them. And I'm like, and what do? I called on my friends that have this and are more experienced, that this is like their life. And they're like, Trisha, you're fine. Because let's be honest, there were times when I didn't feel very fine. And it was hard, it was difficult. But that same skill set, the same thing, the resourcefulness that God had gifted me in that moment, was the one that I used when I felt like I couldn't be alone after I lost people that were close to me. It's the same one when I called and said, hey, I need you. I need you right now. And that's how God shows up. These are the gifts. How many of you know that you're the person your friends are gonna call because you're the one that shows up? Maybe that's your gift. Maybe that's the gift you use to serve others, and maybe you've been hiding and sitting back going, I don't know if it's really worth it. I wanna be there for them, but I'm not really sure. I wanna show up and lead in that direction, but it's not that big of a deal. Maybe that's you, and maybe that's where you're at today. And the whole time that I'm talking, I hope you see yourself in this story, because I do so often sit down and go, okay, would I continue to move forward? But then I look back when there was no other choice, the same way, being surrounded by the Philistines, and you have to move forward or you die. Let's move, it's a little aggressive. Let's come backwards to the chickens. We'll go, I'm just kidding. All right, so verse 8, it says, all right, Jonathan replied, we'll cross over to the men and then let them see us. If they say, wait until we reach you, then we will stay where we are and we're not gonna go up to them. But if they say, come on up, then we'll go up because the Lord has handed them over to us and that's gonna be our sign. Basically, let's paraphrase. The Philistines are gonna be like, yo, you wanna fight? Jonathan's like, yes, let's go. We got this, all right? That was the sign. The insult from the Philistines was a cue that Jonathan was to move forward. If you were with me in one of my coaching experiences, we talk about the fire that you face, the hardship, the insults, the adversity. I try with everything inside of me to change the fact that adversity is sometimes a sign that you're going in the right direction. The sharp rocks, the insults, the hardship. What if that was a sign that this is exactly where you were supposed to be? Because you are not gonna have the strength at this point to move forward. You are not gonna have the strength with your minimal resources and your fear and all of that to move forward and win the battle. But at that moment, in your utmost fear, is where God moves. So what if that is the very place he's calling you to? So often, I cannot even tell you, we talk to so many people who are afraid to feel what they feel. And I studied, y'all, I spent years because I was raised in church, I knew the Bible, but understanding the mind and how it works and the gifts God is giving us to renew our mind was something that I became curious about in college. I studied business and all this, and I was like, how do people think and how do they work? And it was crazy because we have this gift that God has given us in our mind to say we can and we will, and the effects of fear, and there's so much that happens in your body. But when God says, it's time. When God says, hey, you need to call that girl. She needs you right now. Hey, you need to go lead that men's ministry that you were talking about. Go take them on the hunt, whatever y'all like to do. Shoot guns, is that what people do? No, I'm just kidding. All the manly things. There are times when God's, like we said, went back in 1 Peter, each of you should use whatever gifts you have. This is how God's grace shows up. Josie talked about this morning, to knowing God's voice. What if the way he speaks to us is through all of you and your gifts? What if your showing up is how people are going to know what God's presence is like? What it means to feel grace embodied, what it means to feel unconditional love and forgiveness, and what it means to see passion out and stepping out into what you're called to. This, y'all, is, again, you'll see, I'm very passionate about it because my life, this isn't the formula that I was raised with. It was the one that I decided God had placed in my heart and said, we're gonna go after it. Everybody, my whole family's like, didn't pin you as the farm girl, living in a small town, doing whatever. And here I am, hanging out with my goats and chickens and cows. But it's something that you've got to open your mind to say, you know what? Maybe there's something in you. Maybe it's not the farm experience, but maybe it's something else. So as we go down, let's go back to Jonathan. Jonathan says, follow me. Jonathan told his armor bearer, for the Lord has handed them over to Israel. Y'all, he hadn't even got there yet. And he's like, follow me. It's already done. Let's do this. Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet. That's it. His hands and feet with his armor bearer behind him. Jonathan cut them down and his armor bearer followed and finished them off. Look, Jonathan was probably like the size, I'm assuming, of my husband. He's 6'4", I feel like he just came in with his hands and feet and was like, we're gonna give him the 1-2 punch. The armor bearer's coming behind him. In that first assault, Jonathan and his armor bearer struck down about 20 men in a half-acre field. Y'all. Terror spread to the Philistine army. This is all you go back and read the story. It's so good. But the Lord saved Israel that day. They went in, the Philistines were all confused. Jonathan shows up and all he did was have to use the very raw materials that he had. What raw materials are you sitting on right now? Right now that you have. And you've been waiting for, when God does this, then I'll this. When God does this, then I will go. I'll volunteer or lead that small group when God does X. There are so many of you that have a special, unique gift. And so my goal is not to take all the pressure off of Pastor John here, but you all are here to serve one another. When I did this exercise in the women's group, there's about 40 of us in the women's ministry, just women. And I'd asked who had gone through some hard things. We've all been through some hard things. And you get a show of hands if you've been through something hard. Go. Only 3 people in the room. I'm so sorry. This message does not apply. I'll talk about the chickens at the end just to wrap that up, make you feel good about this. But you've been through hard things. And I'd asked them how many of them wish they had somebody with them during that time. And over half of those people that had raised their hands then also wish they were with them. Y'all, this is within our own community. This is within our own church. That's not okay. I know y'all were like, God, she was so fun and bubbly when I met her outside. She's being so mean. Sorry, Lord gave it to me a few weeks ago, and here I am just telling you about it. It's not a bad thing This is calling you up and calling you out into something really amazing that God has for you. I don't know if you've watched the news lately. Don't, it's very depressing. It's very depressing. But it's not looking good out there. And it's not just, I'm not talking about just the church as a whole. I'm talking about you as you walk out into the world. I'm talking about you as you step out in the very gifts that you've been given. The hospitality gift isn't just so that you can lead the team here. It's for the people outside too. It's for the people that you meet randomly. The ones when you look somebody in the eyes at the grocery store or supermarket and you're like, hey, how was your day? How often do you think they get asked that? 0 chance. Our world, this is here. We come get filled. We serve. This, for me, this is total opinion. This is my little circle. This is my little soapbox. They gave me the microphone, so I'm going to say it. This is, for me, a training ground for your gifts. This is a training ground in church where you get to refine the gifts God has given you so that you can go out into the world and bring more people back in. That's my personal opinion. So here is where you test it. And you're like, I think I might want to speak on stage one day. Great. There's plenty of opportunities. Let's try that. I think I want to maybe lead like a small group. Let's start with 3 to 5 people. Awesome. Try that. Whenever you hear that there was a death in the church, don't wait for Pastor John to be the one and somebody else to send out. What if that was your gift to go and serve? I am who I am today because of the village of people that surrounded me. Whenever my mom was working hard and whatever, my dad wasn't there, there were people. God used everyone. And I'll forever, Jessica knows we grew up in church together. And it was the village of people that refined and helped and shaped and spoke life into me and said, you're going to do great things one day. I did not know this is going to look like this. But here we are, looking like this. But just like Jonathan, just like as he stepped forward, you might be in a season where you need to sit in the promise of God. And I'm here for that. Come and get prayer. Get your people, find you your armor bearer that is like, whatever you need, I'm here. Find your people. That you are, where you go in life is going to be determined about what you believe about God and who you're surrounding yourself with. Do you believe that God can teach you and take you and carry you and shape you and take your hands and feet and use them for something good? Do you believe that? That is my passion and why I feel like I'm here today. Because life is hard sometimes. It's just terrible. There are days where you're like, forget this, I'm staying in bed. There's Netflix in it all day. Never done that, actually, but it sounds good. But you get to a point where you just don't want to face what's out there because it is hard and heavy and messy. Sometimes it is beautiful and powerful and exciting and you want to shout it from the mountaintops. But what good is that when you don't have anybody to share it with? It is essential that we change the way we're looking at that hard thing, because had I not had a dad, if I had a dad that taught me all the things and was always there or whatever, would I have been as resourceful as I was when I was married to a military man by myself? I don't know. But that sharp, jagged path that felt like it was so stinking uncomfortable that I might not have wished it on my worst enemy was the very path I needed to get to where I am today. This mom of 2 boys married to a soldier who people were like, how do you do it? And I'm like, I don't know. But when I look back, I realized God was using everything, every moment to bring me here. So as we get to this point, I want you to look back and think to yourself, because we're going to do something. Because again, I am a motivational speaker, coach by nature. So we're going to do a little bit different today. And as y'all can get ready to come up here in the next few minutes, because we have a little exercise. It's not an exercise, but instead of an altar call, as we sit here today, I want you to think about some things right now. Who is walking with you through those jagged edges? Are they talking you out of it? Or are they like, you've got this, let's do this. Wherever you go, I got you, I believe in you, it's awesome. Who's walking with you? And are they encouraging you to use your gifts? When was the last time somebody encouraged you to operate in that gift that you have? When was the last time you wanted to, but didn't because of fear? There's enough of you in this room for me to know, and I've done this enough time on stages that I know there's at least one of you in here. And if this message was for one, that's all I was here for. I was like, Lord, it's a party of one, you, and that's it. Like, we're here, you better come, because it's just me, little vessel of glory. But there's at least one of you in here where you're teeter-tottering and you're like, man, I want to step out. This thing, there's a pattern that you keep seeing and repeated, and you're like, oh, there it is again. Oh, there it is again. And that's not by accident. I work with people all over the country, and every time they're like, you have no idea. This happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. The minute they say it out loud, it's like all of the world comes together. And I'm like, look at the way God works. Look at how he does it. What he needs you to do is acknowledge that that's there. If you push it down, if you push all of these gifts down, we're withholding the examples of God's grace in its various forms from the very people that surround us. And that's why I love 1 Peter 4:10, because it's whatever gifts you have received. With Jonathan, he had his hands and his feet and a hype man. That's enough. There's plenty of you in here that if you don't have a hype man or woman, you can find one, I'm sure, right here today. And if not, I'm a professional hype girl. It's what I like to do. But I want you to think about something today. Think about something that you don't know how to do. You're struggling with, you're wrestling it right now. You're wrestling with something that you're like, I don't know how to forgive that person for how they hurt me. I don't know how to beat cancer. I don't know how to pay off all that debt. I don't know how to step out into that new job that I have been dreaming and praying about all my life. I don't know how to quit my job. I don't know how to ask for a raise. How many of you have something in your life right now that you just don't know how to do? That you know there's here. Maybe you've been given the gift of authority or purpose and you're not getting to operate in it, and you know it's time to step out. You've been in God's promise. Maybe, let's say, for example, I worked with somebody a few weeks ago, and she was in the very blessing, the job that God had given her, the one she had prayed for. It's like the pomegranate tree, and she was there. And she was so happy to be there, but she knew there was something more. This is that moment I'm talking about, when it's time to step out, make the phone call, ask for forgiveness, do something different. This is where all of the moments that you've endured, all of the fires you faced, all of the hardships you've endured, this is what God has built in you. This is your faith growing over time. Faith isn't built when it's all as easy. It's built in the thorny path. It's built in the rocky edges. It's built in the uncomfortable seasons. And I got to a point where I was so sick of feeling uncomfortable. I was so sick. I mean, the very thing I prayed for in life, the thing with my dad and my brother, and it didn't come to pass. And I was like, God. And then COVID happened, and the whole world shut down, and everybody was anxious and depressed and hurting. And I was like, what do I do? And I was like, just use your voice. The very thing that I was made fun of for my whole life. Little girl, mouth of the South, that's what they called me. No big deal. Like to talk. And I can talk to anybody for any amount of time. Again, they gave me the microphone. So here we are. But now I get to speak life into people. I get to encourage them and build them up and tell them that they have been created for a purpose with a unique set of gifts that need to be used. Your story and the way that you faced it is so unique to you. It's like your fingerprint. And the way you got through it, somebody needs to hear it. Somebody needs that. But if you sit on it and it was just for you and me, thank you, Lord, for who you've done, it's your promise that you get to sit under. But maybe sharing it is what God has for you. Maybe sharing it and stepping out is your next step. You got a little piece of paper when you walked in here, you should have. And if you don't, let me know. It's just a little white piece of paper. Did anybody get one? No? Oh, it's on your seat backs. I'm so sorry. It's in your seat back. Look behind you. I apologize. Miscommunication. I might be talking, but I didn't talk well enough. There's a little piece of paper in your seat backs. Oh, the backs of the cards? Okay. Pick any piece of paper that's in your seat back front. Yep. Y'all, you're just going to write something on it. So a little bit different today. Typically, Pastor John brings somebody to the altar. If you want to pray. I'm not going to do that. We're going to do something. This is for you today. This is for you. If you find yourself in a moment, as I was sitting here talking, and you're like, God, I got all these raw materials. I'm not really sure what they are. Maybe you're in a season where you don't know how. What is something that you are facing right now that you don't know how to do? And it could be trivial. Like, I don't know how to build a fence for my cow. I mean, it could be anything. I know that sounds really simple, but did you know that God is in the simple? Like, I asked him for that. I'm like, Lord, I'm gonna need you to give me a whole lot of patience because I can't deal with these cows no more. It's all of it. But the same God who shows up is the same one who shows up when I'm like, I can't live without my brother anymore. I wanna see him and I can't stand this pain. He's the same one that shows up. So today we're gonna do one of two things, which means every single one of you are gonna write something down. Okay, the first one is if you're facing something right now that you don't know how to do, you're gonna write down, I don't know how to, and you're gonna write it down. And then because we're gonna walk up here in a minute and you're gonna drop it in this bucket. They're gonna sing a song. I'm gonna give you time to think about it and you're gonna walk up here because we're gonna pray over them. Anonymous, please don't write your name on it. I don't need to know who it is. Or the other half of you, if you're like, well, I know how to do everything in my life right now, then what is something that you did not know how to do, but now you do and your life is better because of it? I didn't know how to speak on stage. I didn't know how to create this business, but now my family is set up for generations because I worked hard. I didn't know how to beat cancer, but here I am in remission and God is faithful. I want half of this room, if you need, we're gonna praise, we're gonna celebrate, because what you're gonna find is the half of you that are facing something you don't know how to do, there's probably the other half that does know how. So I want you to get a visual example of just this room, that you're not alone in your fear and uncertainty and your doubt, but I can almost guarantee that God is calling you to move forward into something. I don't know what that is. That's for you and God to decide. But something different. Maybe it's more joy, more abundance. Maybe it's to get off the medication and you just don't know how. You don't want to be attached to it anymore. You want freedom. Maybe, again, there's forgiveness or unforgiveness, and maybe there's not. I don't know how to quit drinking. I don't know how to have more happiness. I don't know what to do with my life. I want them to start singing right now, and then I want you to just write them down. There's a bucket up here, 2 of them right here. Come drop them in the bucket. As you see it, just write it down. I don't know how to blank. Thank you. And then the other one is, I didn't know how, but now I do. So we're gonna do one of two things. We're gonna pray or praise, one of the two. So y'all go for it.